In the heart of Manhattan, where skyscrapers kissed the clouds and luxury cars lined the streets, there lived a man named Charles Whitmore. He was no ordinary person. He was a billionaire, known for his sharp mind and even sharper business deals. But tonight, Charles wasn't thinking about stocks or board meetings. Tonight, he was celebrating something special with his family. The Whitmores had booked a table at one of the fanciest restaurants in town. The place buzzed with energy. Soft jazz played in the background, crystal chandeliers sparkled above, and waiters moved gracefully between tables, balancing trays laden with gourmet dishes. Charles sat beside his wife Evelyn, who looked elegant in her silk dress while their teenage daughter Lily fidgeted with excitement across from them. Lily was glowing as she showed off a dazzling diamond necklace around her neck. "Dad, isn't it beautiful?" she asked, tilting her head so the light caught the gemstones just right. Charles nodded absent-mindedly, more focused on reviewing some papers on his phone than admiring jewelry. Still, he couldn't deny that the piece was exquisite. It was a family heirloom, passed down through generations and worth $500,000. As they perused the menu, a young waitress approached their table. She introduced herself quietly, almost shyly. Her name tag read, Sophie Harper. She wore the standard black and white uniform, but carried an air of quiet dignity. There was something different about her. Her eyes held a depth that didn't match her youthful face. While taking their orders, Sophie spoke softly yet confidently, making sure everyone felt attended to without being intrusive. Charles barely noticed her beyond a fleeting thought. She seems out of place here. Most of the staff at this upscale restaurant were polished professionals, but Sophie had a simplicity about her, a rawness that stood out among the glitz and glamour. Little did he know how significant this observation would become. The dinner went smoothly. They laughed, shared stories, and enjoyed every bite of the delicious meal. By the time dessert arrived, the atmosphere was warm and relaxed. As Sophie cleared their plates, Charles glanced up briefly, catching sight of her again. This time, though, something caught his eye, a small pendant hanging from a delicate chain around her neck. It shimmered faintly under the soft lighting of the restaurant. For a moment he dismissed it as coincidence, but deep down a nagging feeling lingered. A few days later, Charles found himself scrolling through the news during breakfast when a headline grabbed his attention. Waitress fired after allegedly stealing luxury necklace. Intrigued, he clicked on the article. What he saw next made his blood run cold. The accompanying photo showed Sophie Harper, the same waitress from the restaurant, wearing what appeared to be Lily's missing necklace. His heart skipped a beat. Hadn't Lily mentioned misplacing it earlier? At first, he brushed it off, assuming she'd simply forgotten where she left it. Now, staring at the image on his screen, doubt crept in. Was it possible that Sophie had taken it? Charles immediately called Evelyn into the room. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the article. Evelyn gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. Together, they tried calling Lily, but she didn't pick up her phone. Frustrated and alarmed, Charles decided to take matters into his own hands. If Sophie really had stolen the necklace, he needed answers, and fast. Using his connections, Charles arranged a visit to the police station where Sophie was being held for questioning. When he arrived, he walked briskly past the officers, his expensive suit and commanding presence turning heads. Inside the interrogation room, Sophie sat hunched over, clutching a paper cup of water. She looked exhausted, her usually bright eyes, now dull and fearful. When she saw Charles enter, her expression shifted from confusion to outright panic. "Mr. Whitmore?" she whispered, recognizing him instantly. Her voice trembled, betraying her nerves. Charles wasted no time. "Where did you get that necklace?" he demanded, his tone firm but not unkind. He pointed directly at the pendant, resting against her collarbone, the very same one that belonged to his daughter. For a moment, Sophie froze. Then, shaking her head vigorously, she stammered, I don't know what you're talking about, this is mine." But Charles wasn't buying it. He stepped closer, studying the necklace carefully. It was unmistakable. The intricate design, the way the diamonds caught the light, it was Lily's. And yet Sophie's reaction seemed genuine, filled with fear rather than defiance. Something about the situation didn't sit right with him. Why would someone accused of theft wear the stolen item so openly? Wouldn't they try to hide it? Before he could press further, Sophie suddenly burst into tears. "Please," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "You have to believe me, I didn't steal anything." The room fell silent except for the sound of her sobs. Charles hesitated, torn between suspicion and curiosity. There was clearly more to this story than met the eye. Determined to uncover the truth, he signaled for the detective overseeing the case to join them. Whatever secret Sophie was hiding, Charles vowed to find out, even if it meant confronting uncomfortable truths about his own family along the way. Charles stood in the small, dimly lit room at the police station, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. Sophie sat across from him, her hands trembling as she clutched the paper cup of water, like it was a lifeline. Her eyes darted nervously, between Charles and the detective who had just entered the room. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. "Start talking," Charles said firmly, his voice low but commanding. He leaned forward slightly, his piercing gaze fixed on Sophie. "If you didn't steal that necklace, then explain why you're wearing my daughter's property right now." Sophie swallowed hard, her throat dry despite the water in her hand. She looked down at the pendant resting against her collarbone, her fingers instinctively brushing it as if seeking comfort. After a long pause, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't steal it. Someone gave it to me." Charles raised an eyebrow, skepticism written all over his face. "Who?" he shot back without missing a beat. "Who would give you something worth $500,000? Sophie hesitated again, clearly struggling to find the words. Tears welled up in her eyes, threatening to spill over. "It was Lily," she admitted finally, her voice cracking under the weight of the confession. "Your daughter. She gave it to me." The room went silent for a moment. Charles stared at her, stunned. His mind raced as he tried to process what she had just said. Could it be true? Why would Lily give away such an expensive family heirloom? And why hadn't she mentioned anything to him or Evelyn? Before he could respond, the detective stepped in, his tone calm but professional. "Miss Harper, can you tell us exactly how this happened? When did Lily give you the necklace and why?" Sophie took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. "It wasn't planned or anything," she began, her voice growing a little stronger as she recounted the story. "Lily came to the restaurant a few weeks ago. At first I thought she was just another customer, but then she started coming back almost every day. She'd sit at one of my tables and order coffee or dessert, always asking me questions about my life, where I grew up, what I wanted to do in the future." She paused, glancing at Charles before continuing. "We became friends, I guess. She told me she felt trapped by her life, by all the expectations people had of her because of who you are, Mr. Whitmore. She said she admired how free I seemed, even though I worked 2 jobs and lived paycheck to paycheck. One night after closing time, she handed me the necklace and said, 'Take this. You deserve something beautiful.'" Charles listened intently, his expression unreadable. Part of him wanted to believe Sophie's story, but another part couldn't. Shake the doubt gnawing at him. Why would Lily do something so reckless? Giving away a priceless heirloom wasn't just impulsive, it was irresponsible. And yet, there was something genuine about Sophie's demeanor, something raw and honest that made it hard to dismiss her outright. The detective scribbled notes furiously, occasionally glancing up to study Sophie's reactions. "Did anyone else know about this?" he asked. "Anyone see Lily give you the necklace?" Sophie shook her head. "No, it was late. Everyone else had already left. It was just the 2 of us outside the restaurant." Charles frowned, his thoughts swirling. If no one else had witnessed the exchange, proving Sophie's innocence would be nearly impossible. The evidence, the necklace itself, was damning. Even if Lily had given it to her willingly, it didn't explain why Sophie still had it when she was accused of theft days later. Something didn't add up. As if reading his mind, the detective turned to Charles. "Sir, we'll need to speak with your daughter to confirm this. Until then, we can't rule out foul play." Charles nodded curtly, his jaw tightening. He knew what came next, a confrontation with Lily. But before he left the station, he turned back to Sophie. Despite his suspicions, he couldn't ignore the vulnerability in her eyes. She looked exhausted, scared, and utterly alone. "You'd better hope you're telling the truth," he said quietly, his tone softer than before. "Because if you're lying, this isn't going to end well for you." Sophie met his gaze, her own filled with desperation. "I'm not lying, Mr. Whitmore. I swear. Please just talk to Lily. She'll tell you everything." With that, Charles turned and walked out of the room, leaving Sophie behind. As he climbed into his luxury car and drove home, his mind was a whirlwind of emotions. Anger, confusion, and a strange sense of guilt churned inside him. Guilt, not because he doubted Sophie entirely, but because he realized he might not know his own daughter as well as he thought. When he arrived home, Evelyn greeted him at the door, her face etched with worry. "What happened?" she asked immediately. "Did you find out anything?" Charles sighed heavily, running a hand through his hair. "It's complicated," he admitted. "Sophie claims Lily gave her the necklace. We need to talk to her tonight." Evelyn's eyes widened in shock. "Lily gave it away? Why would she do that?" "I don't know," Charles replied, his voice tinged with frustration. "But we're about to find out." They found Lily in her bedroom, sprawled on her bed, scrolling through her phone. She looked up in surprise when her parents walked in, their expression serious. "What's going on?" she asked cautiously, sensing the tension in the air. Charles wasted no time. "Lily, is this true?" he demanded, pulling up the news article on his phone and showing it to her. "Did you give your necklace to that waitress?" Lily's face paled as she stared at the screen, her lips parting in disbelief. For a moment, she looked like a deer caught in headlights. Then slowly she nodded. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I gave it to her," Evelyn gasped, clutching her chest. "Why, sweetheart? Why would you do something like that?" Lily hesitated, tears welling up in her eyes. "Because I hate my life," she blurted out suddenly, startling both her parents. "I hate feeling like I'm suffocating under all these rules and expectations. Sophie gets to live her own life, even if it's hard. She doesn't have people breathing down her neck, telling her what to do every second of every day. I wanted to help her, okay? I wanted to make things better for someone else for once." Her words hung in the air, heavy and raw. Charles and Evelyn exchanged a glance, their hearts breaking a little at the pain in their daughter's voice. They had always wanted the best for her, but somewhere along the way, they had failed to see the toll it was taking on her spirit. After a long silence, Charles spoke, his voice softer now. "Lily, we're sorry, we didn't realize." He trailed off, unsure of how to finish. How could he put into words the regret swelling inside him? But Lily wasn't done. "And now Sophie is getting blamed for something she didn't do," she continued, her voice rising. "You have to fix this, Dad. You have to clear her name." Charles nodded solemnly. "We will," he promised. "But first, we need to figure out who framed her and why." The next morning, Charles sat at the dining table with a cup of coffee in his hand, staring blankly at the steam rising from it. His mind was racing, replaying everything that had happened over the past 24 hours. Sophie's tearful confession, Lily's outburst about feeling trapped, the stolen necklace. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle that didn't quite fit together yet. Evelyn walked into the room, her face pale and drawn. She hadn't slept much either. "What are we going to do?" she asked softly, sitting across from him. Her voice carried a mix of worry and frustration. Charles sighed deeply, rubbing his temples. "We need answers," he said firmly. "And we're not going to get them by sitting here." He picked up his phone and dialed Detective Harris, the officer handling Sophie's case. After a brief conversation, Charles arranged for another meeting. This time not just with Sophie but also with the restaurant manager and other staff members who worked the night of the alleged theft. When Charles arrived at the police station, later that day, Detective Harris greeted him with a folder in hand. Inside were security tapes from the restaurant, along with statements from several employees. As they reviewed the footage together, one thing became clear. Sophie hadn't been anywhere near the coat rack where the necklace was supposedly taken. In fact, the camera showed her serving tables on the opposite side of the room during the exact time the theft allegedly occurred. Detective Harris pointed to the screen. "See this?" he said, pausing the video. "This is your daughter, leaving through the back door with Sophie after closing time. They were talking, laughing even. Then, a few minutes later, Sophie walks away wearing the necklace." Charles frowned, leaning closer to the monitor. The grainy footage didn't lie. It confirmed what Sophie had claimed earlier. Lily had given her the necklace willingly. But if that was true, then why had someone planted it in Sophie's locker, though? Next day, who would want to frame her? Back at the restaurant, Charles met with the manager, an older man named Greg, who seemed nervous to be involved in such a high-profile case. "I'm sorry about all this," Greg stammered as he led Charles to a quiet corner of the bustling kitchen. "Sophie has always been a good worker, hardworking, polite. I never imagined she'd be accused of something like this." Charles nodded thoughtfully. "Tell me about the other staff," he asked. "Anyone who might have had a problem with Sophie?" Greg hesitated, glancing around as if making sure no one was listening. "Well, there's Rachel," he admitted, finally. "She's been here longer than Sophie and doesn't exactly hide her dislike for her, always complaining about how Sophie gets special treatment or whatever. Honestly, I think she's jealous." Jealousy. That word struck a chord with Charles. He remembered how Lily had spoken so fondly of Sophie. Their late-night conversations outside the restaurant, the bond they shared. Could someone else have seen that connection and resented it enough to sabotage Sophie? Charles thanked Greg and asked to speak with Rachel directly. When she entered the break room, her arms crossed defensively, Charles could immediately sense her hostility. She was younger than Sophie, maybe in her mid-20s, with sharp features and a restless energy about her. "You wanted to see me?" Rachel asked curtly, avoiding eye contact. "Yes," Charles replied calmly, pulling out a chair and gesturing for her to sit. "I understand you've been working here for a while. Can you tell me what happened the night my daughter's necklace went missing?" Rachel shrugged nonchalantly. "Not much to say. I was busy with customers, didn't see anything suspicious." Charles studied her carefully, noting the way her fingers tapped nervously against her arm. Something about her demeanor felt off. "Were you aware that Sophie and my daughter had become close?" he probed gently. Rachel's expression darkened, slightly. "Yeah, I noticed. Weird, right? A rich girl hanging out with someone like her." Her tone dripped with sarcasm. Charles leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Someone like her? What do you mean by that?" Rachel hesitated, caught off guard by the question. "Nothing, just, she's different, okay? Like, not cut out for this place. Too dreamy, too innocent." "Innocent enough to take a fall for something she didn't do?" Charles countered sharply. Rachel flinched, her composure cracking for a split second. Then, regaining her cool, she shot back, "Look, I don't know what you're implying, but I didn't plant any necklace in her locker. If anyone's framing her, it's probably someone else." Her words hung in the air, laced with defensiveness. Charles didn't press further, at least not yet. Instead, he thanked her and excused himself, his suspicions growing stronger. Later that evening, Charles returned to the police station, where Detective Harris had uncovered new evidence. A janitor who cleaned the restaurant early in the morning reported seeing Rachel lingering near Sophie's locker before heading home. According to the janitor, Rachel had glanced over her shoulder multiple times as if making sure no one was watching. "This is it," Detective Harris said, spreading photos of the locker area across the table. "It looks like Rachel slipped the necklace inside while Sophie wasn't around. Probably figured it'd look bad when the police found it." Charles stared at the images, his jaw tightening. All the pieces were falling into place now. Rachel's jealousy, Her snide remarks, her behavior during their conversation, it all pointed to her guilt. But why go to such lengths to harm someone she barely knew? As if reading his thoughts, Detective Harris added, "Sometimes people act out of spite. Maybe Rachel saw your daughter and Sophie bonding and thought it threatened her standing here. Or maybe she just couldn't stand seeing someone else succeed." Charles nodded slowly, his anger simmering beneath the surface. He hated injustice, especially when it hurt innocent people like Sophie. Determined to set things straight, he called the detective aside and requested a formal interrogation of Rachel. The following day, Rachel sat stiffly in the interrogation room, her usual confidence replaced by unease. Detective Harris laid out the evidence piece by piece, the security footage showing her near Sophie's locker, the janitor's statement, and the timeline proving Sophie couldn't have committed the theft. For a while, Rachel tried to deny everything, claiming she was being framed herself. But as the weight of the evidence mounted, her resolve crumbled. Tears streamed down her face as she confessed, admitting she had planted the necklace to ruin Sophie's reputation. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," Rachel sobbed, her voice breaking. "I just wanted her gone. She acted like she was better than everyone else, always smiling and acting so perfect. And then your daughter started coming around, treating her like some kind of charity project. It made me sick." Charles listened silently, his heart heavy. Jealousy and resentment had driven Rachel to destroy someone else's life, all because she felt overshadowed. It was a tragic reminder of how small actions could spiral into devastating consequences. With Rachel's confession recorded, Sophie was cleared of all charges. Charles personally ensured she was released from custody, apologizing profusely for the ordeal she had endured. Though shaken, Sophie accepted his apology graciously, her eyes filled with relief. But Charles knew the work wasn't done yet. There were still wounds to heal. Not just Sophie's, but Lily's too. And perhaps his own. The moment Sophie stepped out of the police station, the crisp autumn air hit her face like a gentle reminder that she was free. Free from the accusations, free from the fear that had gripped her for days. But despite the relief washing over her, there was still a heaviness in her chest, a lingering shadow of what she'd been through. Charles stood beside her, his tall frame casting a protective silhouette against the fading sunlight. He didn't say much, but his presence spoke volumes. "Thank you," Sophie said softly, her voice trembling slightly as she turned to look at him. "I don't know how I can ever repay you." Charles shook his head, his expression softening. "You don't owe me anything," he replied firmly. "What happened wasn't your fault. The only thing I want now is to make sure you're okay." Sophie nodded, though her eyes betrayed a mix of gratitude and uncertainty. She hugged herself, tightly, trying to ward off the chill, not just from the weather but from the emotional toll of the past few days. For someone who had always prided herself on being strong and independent, this experience had left her feeling vulnerable in ways she hadn't anticipated. Meanwhile, back at the Whitmore residence, Lily sat alone in her room, staring blankly at the wall. Her parents had told her about Rachel's confession and Sophie's release, but it did little to ease the guilt gnawing at her insides. She replayed the events in her mind over and over again, the late-night conversations with Sophie, the moment she handed her the necklace, the careless way she hadn't thought about the consequences. Her phone buzzed on the bed beside her, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from Sophie. "Hey, I hope we can talk soon. I really need to explain everything." Lily hesitated before replying. Part of her wanted to ignore the message, to bury herself deeper into the shame she felt. But another part knew she owed Sophie an apology, one that went beyond words. Taking a deep breath, she typed back, "Of course. Can I come see you tomorrow?" The next afternoon, Lily arrived at Sophie's small apartment, tucked away in a modest neighborhood on the outskirts of the city. The building was nothing like the gleaming skyscrapers or sprawling mansions she was used to seeing. Still, there was a warmth to it, a sense of community that felt strangely comforting. Sophie greeted her at the door, her smile tentative but sincere. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let Lily enter. The apartment was cozy with mismatched furniture and colorful fabrics draped over the chairs. A sketchpad lay open on the coffee table, filled with intricate designs, evidence of Sophie's passion for fashion design. They sat down awkwardly, neither quite sure where to begin. Finally, Lily broke the silence. "I'm so sorry," she blurted out, tears already welling up in her eyes. "I never meant for any of this to happen. I thought giving you the necklace would be, I don't know, a nice gesture, something meaningful. But instead, it ruined your life." Sophie reached out instinctively, placing a reassuring hand on Lily's arm. "Hey, stop," she said gently. "It's not your fault. You were trying to help me, and I appreciate that more than you'll ever know. None of us could have predicted what Rachel would do. But I should have known better," Lily insisted, her voice rising with emotion. "I shouldn't have given it to you without telling my parents first. I should have realized how much trouble it could cause." Sophie sighed, leaning back against the couch. "Look, I get it. You were frustrated with your life, and maybe giving me the necklace was your way of rebelling against all those expectations. But listen to me. You didn't ruin my life. Sure, the past few days have been awful, but they've also made me realize something important." "What's that?" Lily asked quietly, wiping her tears. "That I deserve better," Sophie said, with quiet determination. "Not just because of the necklace, but because of who I am. I work hard, I dream big, and I refuse to let anyone make me feel less than I am. And honestly, meeting you and your family has shown me that there are people who care enough to fight for what's right, even when it's hard." Lily stared at her, surprised by the strength in her voice. In that moment, she saw Sophie not as the shy waitress from the restaurant, but as someone resilient, someone who refused to let adversity define her. It was humbling and inspiring. Later that evening, Charles and Evelyn sat in their living room, reflecting on everything that had transpired. The house was unusually quiet, the absence of Lily's laughter echoing through its halls. They had watched their daughter grow up surrounded by privilege, yet struggled to find her place in a world that demanded perfection. Now, they couldn't help but wonder if they had played a role in stifling her spirit. "We failed her," Evelyn murmured, breaking the silence. Her voice was heavy with regret. "All these years we focused on giving her the best of everything, private schools, fancy vacations, designer clothes. But we forgot to ask her what she wanted." Charles nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the fireplace. "I know," he admitted, his tone tinged with sadness. "I pushed her too hard, expected too much. I thought I was preparing her for success, but instead I think I made her feel trapped." Evelyn reached out, placing a hand on his knee. "It's not too late to fix things," she said softly. "We can start by listening to her, really listening. Let her tell us what she dreams about, what makes her happy. Maybe then she'll feel like she has a voice again." Charles took a deep breath, nodding once more. "And Sophie," he added, after a pause. "We need to do something for her too. She's been through hell because of our family, and she deserves more than just an apology." Evelyn smiled faintly, her eyes lighting up with hope. "Do you remember what she said when we visited her apartment, about wanting to go to design school?" Charles nodded, recalling the sketches scattered across Sophie's coffee table. "She's talented," he said thoughtfully. "Really talented. If she got the chance, I think she could achieve amazing things." "Then let's give her that chance," Evelyn suggested, her voice firm yet kind. "We have the means to support her dreams. Why not use them to make a difference for her and for Lily?" For the first time in days, Charles felt a glimmer of optimism. Perhaps this ordeal, painful as it had been, was an opportunity, a chance to mend broken relationships, to learn from mistakes, and to grow as a family. The following week, Charles arranged a meeting with Sophie at a local cafe. He arrived early, choosing a quiet corner where they could talk without distractions. When Sophie walked in, she looked hesitant, clutching her bag tightly as if bracing herself for bad news. But Charles greeted her warmly, gesturing for her to sit. I wanted to thank you again, he began, his tone sincere, for enduring all of this with such grace. Not many people would have handled it the way you did. Sophie smiled shyly, shaking her head. I didn't have much choice, she replied. But thank you for believing in me. That meant a lot. Charles leaned forward, his expression serious yet kind. There's something else I want to discuss, he continued. I know the past few weeks have been tough, and I can't undo what happened, but I'd like to offer you something. A chance to pursue your dreams. Sophie blinked in confusion, unsure of what he meant. My dreams? She echoed uncertainly. Yes, Charles said with a nod. Your sketches, they're incredible. I've spoken with Evelyn, and we both agree that you have real talent. We'd like to help fund your education at a design school. No strings attached. Sophie's eyes widened in shock, her hands flying to her mouth. Are you serious? She whispered, her voice barely audible. Completely, Charles assured her. You deserve this, Sophie. And frankly, we owe it to you after everything you've been through. Tears welled up in Sophie's eyes, spilling down her cheeks as she struggled to process his words. For years, she had dreamed of attending design school, but financial constraints had always seemed like an insurmountable barrier. Now here was someone offering her a lifeline, a chance to turn her passion into a career. I don't know what to say, Sophie admitted, her voice choked with emotion. Thank you doesn't feel like enough. You don't have to say anything, Charles replied, his own eyes misty with pride. Just promise me one thing, that you'll keep chasing your dreams, no matter what. Sophie nodded vigorously, her heart swelling with gratitude. As she left the cafe later that day, she felt a renewed sense of purpose, a belief that even in the darkest moments, there was always a glimmer of light waiting to guide her forward. Sophie's life began to change almost immediately after that conversation with Charles. The weight of the accusations had been lifted, and now she was being handed an opportunity she never thought possible, a chance to chase her dreams without the constant worry of money holding her back. But as thrilled as she was, the transition wasn't easy. It came with its own challenges, doubts, and moments of self-reflection. The first few weeks were a whirlwind. Charles and Evelyn helped Sophie enroll in a prestigious design school known for nurturing raw talent into polished professionals. They covered her tuition, provided her with materials, and even arranged for her to meet some industry experts who could guide her along the way. At first, Sophie felt out of place among students who seemed so confident, so sure of themselves. Many of them came from wealthy families or had connections in the fashion world, things Sophie didn't have. She often found herself questioning whether she truly belonged there, but Sophie had something those other students didn't: grit. Every time she doubted herself, she reminded herself of how far she'd come, from working long hours at the restaurant just to make ends meet, to standing strong when false accusations threatened to ruin her life. Sophie knew she was capable of overcoming anything. Slowly but surely, she started finding her footing. Professors noticed her unique perspective, her ability to create designs that told stories rather than simply following trends. One professor even pulled her aside after class one day and said, "You're going to go far, kid. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Lily, meanwhile, was undergoing her own transformation. After everything that had happened, she realized she couldn't keep living under the shadow of her father's expectations. For years, she had gone along with whatever he wanted, attending elite schools, excelling in subjects she didn't care about, pretending to be the perfect daughter. But deep down, she had always felt suffocated. Giving Sophie the necklace had been her way of breaking free, however recklessly. Now, she needed to find healthier ways to express herself. With her parents' newfound willingness to listen, Lily opened up about her true passions. She admitted that while she appreciated their efforts to give her the best, she didn't want to follow the path they had laid out for her. Instead, she wanted to work with people, helping those less fortunate, giving back to the community. Inspired by Sophie's resilience, Lily decided to volunteer at a local shelter, spending her weekends serving meals and organizing workshops for kids. It was humbling, exhausting, and incredibly rewarding all at once. Charles watched his daughter blossom in this new role, and though he still worried about her future, he couldn't deny the happiness he saw in her eyes. He remembered what Sophie had said during their meeting, that sometimes the most valuable thing you can give someone is a voice. That stuck with him. For the first time, he made a conscious effort to let Lily speak for herself, to support her choices instead of dictating them. As months passed, Sophie and Lily grew closer. What had started as a friendship born out of rebellion turned into a genuine bond rooted in mutual respect and understanding. Sophie admired Lily's courage to step outside her comfort zone, while Lily looked up to Sophie's determination to build a better life despite the odds stacked against her. They spent countless hours together, Lily helping Sophie brainstorm ideas for her designs, Sophie encouraging Lily to pursue her dreams fearlessly. One evening, as they sat side by side sketching in Sophie's apartment, Lily turned to her and asked, "Do you ever feel guilty? About taking their help, I mean?" Sophie paused, her pencil hovering over the paper. "Sometimes," she admitted honestly. "I know they're doing it because they feel responsible for what happened. But at the same time, I remind myself that I earned this, not just by surviving all that chaos, but by refusing to give up. I'm not taking charity. I'm seizing an opportunity. There's a difference." Lily nodded slowly, absorbing her words. "I think my dad sees it the same way," she said thoughtfully. "He's not just helping you because he feels bad. He sees your potential, Sophie. We both do." That moment stayed with Sophie, reinforcing her belief that she deserved every bit of success coming her way. She poured her heart into her studies, creating collections inspired by her journey, from the struggles of working at the restaurant to the joy of discovering her creative voice. Her final project, a line of clothing called Resilience, became the talk of the campus. Each piece told a story of strength, hope, and perseverance, capturing the essence of who Sophie was and where she had come from. Back at home, Charles reflected on how much his family had changed since that fateful night at the restaurant. He had entered the situation angry and suspicious, convinced that someone had wronged him. But through unraveling the truth, he had discovered flaws within himself, his tendency to control, his inability to see beyond his own vision for success. Helping Sophie hadn't just been about making amends, it had been about learning to let go, to trust others to carve their own paths. Evelyn noticed the shift in him too. "You seem lighter these days," she remarked one evening as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset. "Like you're finally at peace with things." "I think I am," Charles replied, a small smile playing on his lips. "For so long I thought I had to protect everyone, from failure, from disappointment, from making mistakes. But maybe what we really need is to let each other stumble, fall, and figure it out ourselves. That's how we grow." Evelyn reached over, squeezing his hand. "And look at what good has come from it," she said softly. "Sophie is thriving. Lily is happier than she's been in years. And even Rachel, well, she'll have to live with the consequences of her actions, but hopefully, she'll learn something from it too." Charles nodded, gazing out at the horizon. Despite the hardships they had faced, he couldn't help but feel grateful for the lessons they had learned. Life had thrown them a curveball, but instead of letting it break them, they had used it to rebuild stronger, more compassionate versions of themselves. As graduation approached, Sophie prepared for her first big showcase, an event attended by designers, buyers, and industry leaders. She was nervous, of course, but also excited. This was her moment to prove to the world and to herself that she belonged here. On the night of the show, Charles, Evelyn, and Lily sat proudly in the front row, cheering louder than anyone else when Sophie took her bow at the end. Her collection received a standing ovation, and several buyers approached her afterward, eager to collaborate. As Sophie hugged her friends and mentors, tears streaming down her face, she caught sight of the Whitmores in the crowd. Their smiles said everything she needed to hear. "You did it." Later that night, as the celebrations wound down, Sophie found herself alone with Charles. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "Not just for tonight, but for everything. You saved me." Charles shook his head, his eyes shining with pride. No, Sophie. You saved yourself. All we did was give you a chance to shine, and shine she did. Months turned into a year, and Sophie's life transformed in ways she never imagined. Her collection from the graduation showcase had caught the eye of a major fashion label, and they offered her a position as an assistant designer. A dream, come true for someone who once juggled waitressing shifts just to get by. Sophie accepted the offer with gratitude, knowing it was only the beginning of her journey. But what made this chapter even more meaningful was how deeply her bond with the Whitmore family had grown. Charles, Evelyn, and Lily weren't just the people who had helped her. They were now part of her extended family. They celebrated her successes as if they were their own, attending every event she invited them to and cheering her on from the sidelines. In return, Sophie became a source of inspiration for all of them. She reminded Charles of the importance of second chances and humility. For Evelyn, Sophie represented resilience and grace under pressure. And for Lily, Sophie was proof that kindness could change lives, including your own. Lily, too, had found her footing. Volunteering at the shelter had opened her eyes to a world she'd never fully understood before. She began organizing fundraisers, using her family's resources not to flaunt wealth, but to uplift others. One particular initiative, a program aimed at providing scholarships for underprivileged students, was inspired directly by Sophie's story. If someone like me hadn't stepped in, Lily often said, people like Sophie might never get the opportunities they deserve. She also started pursuing a degree in social work, determined to make helping others her career. It wasn't the path her father would have chosen for her, but Charles surprised everyone by being nothing but supportive. Your happiness is what matters most, he told her one evening as they sat together in his study. I've spent so many years trying to shape you into something I thought was right, but seeing you now, I realize you're perfect exactly as you are. Lily hugged him tightly, tears welling up in her eyes. Their relationship had shifted from one of tension to mutual respect and love. For the first time in years, they truly enjoyed each other's company, without the weight of unspoken expectations hanging over them. Sophie visited the Whitmores regularly, bringing laughter and warmth into their home whenever she stopped. On one such visit, Evelyn pulled her aside while Charles and Lily debated over dinner plans. You know, Evelyn began, her tone soft and conspiratorial, we owe you more than we can ever repay. You've brought us closer together as a family. Before all this happened, we were drifting apart. Now look at us, we laugh, we talk, we listen to each other. That's because of you. Sophie blushed, shaking her head modestly. It's not me, she insisted. You did the hard work. All I did was remind you how amazing you already are. Evelyn chuckled, patting Sophie's hand affectionately. Well, whatever it was, thank you, from the bottom of my heart. The ripple effects of Sophie's journey extended beyond just the Whitmore household. At the restaurant where everything had begun, Rachel served tables quietly, keeping her head down and avoiding attention. After confessing to framing Sophie, she had lost her job and faced legal consequences, though Charles had intervened to ensure her punishment wasn't too harsh. Still, the experience left its mark on her. She realized how destructive jealousy could be, not just to others but to herself. One day, Sophie returned to the restaurant, not as a waitress but as a guest. When Rachel saw her walk in, she froze, unsure of what to do or say. Sophie approached her table with a calm smile. Hi, she said simply, extending her hand. How have you been? Rachel hesitated, then shook Sophie's hand awkwardly. I'm okay, she mumbled, clearly uncomfortable. Look, I just want to say I'm sorry. For everything. I was wrong and I regret it every single day. Sophie nodded, her expression kind but firm. Thank you for apologizing. I appreciate that. But let me ask you something. Are you happy? Here. Rachel blinked, taken aback by the question. What do you mean? I mean, Sophie continued gently, is this really where you want to be? Or are you settling because you think it's all you deserve? Rachel stared at her, stunned. No one had ever asked her that before, at least not in a way that felt genuine. "I don't know," she admitted finally. "I guess I never thought about it." "Well, maybe it's time you did," Sophie suggested. "Life's too short to stay stuck somewhere or someone you hate. Trust me, I know." With that, Sophie left Rachel to her thoughts. Later that week, Rachel handed in her resignation, deciding to take a leap of faith and enroll in culinary school. It wasn't easy, but for the first time in years, she felt hopeful about the future. As time went on, Sophie's career soared. Her designs gained recognition not just locally, but internationally, earning her accolades and awards. Yet despite her growing fame, she remained grounded, always remembering where she came from. She often returned to her old neighborhood, mentoring young aspiring designers and encouraging them to believe in themselves. One evening, during a quiet moment at home, Sophie received a call from Lily. "Guess what?" Lily exclaimed excitedly. "My scholarship program got approved. We're going to help 10 kids this year alone." "That's incredible," Sophie replied, genuinely thrilled for her friend. "You should be so proud of yourself." "I couldn't have done it without you," Lily said earnestly. "You showed me that making a difference doesn't have to be complicated. It starts with caring enough to try." Sophie smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Helping others wasn't just about grand gestures. Sometimes it was about small acts of kindness that snowballed into something bigger. And in that sense, both she and Lily had succeeded beyond measure. Years later, when Sophie stood on stage accepting an award for her contributions to the U.S. fashion industry, she took a moment to reflect on her journey. From the chaos of being falsely accused to the joy of achieving her dreams, every step had shaped her into the person she was today. As she looked out at the audience, her eyes landed on the Whitmores sitting proudly in the front row. They weren't just spectators, they were her family, bound not by blood but by shared experiences and unconditional support. In her acceptance speech, Sophie spoke from the heart. There's a saying, "When life gives you lemons, make lemonade." But sometimes life hands you something far sweeter, a chance to grow, to connect, to become better versions of yourselves. To the people who believed in me when I didn't believe in myself, thank you. This isn't just my victory, it's ours. The crowd erupted into applause, but for Sophie, the real reward wasn't the trophy in her hands. It was the knowledge that she had touched lives, and in doing so, had created a legacy of hope, resilience, and redemption. And so, amidst the glittering lights of success, Sophie Harper proved that no matter how dark things may seem, there's always a way forward, if you're brave enough to take it.